Beautiful in and out. Someone who is smart, who is intelligent. So I want like the total package.
The No Ordinary Love Podcast with Rosalind Onell. Every relationship is unique and has its own rhythm and melody. And what worked for them may not necessarily work for you. Welcome, everyone. Excited again. Another week here at No Ordinary Love with our guest today is Michael B. Henry. Welcome. Very excited to have you today. And our kind of theme for this episode is leadership in relationships. And very curious to learn more about what you mean by leadership in relationships. But let me give Michael a chance to introduce himself briefly.
Oh, thank you so much, Rosalind. So my name is Michael B. Henry. I'm an associate MFT out in California. Hopefully I'll be licensed soon, working on that. And I usually work with high school students, but I have also worked with couples. I've worked with county employees with the Employee Assistance Program here in Santa Clara County. And I'm just happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And for the people out there who don't know you or know a lot about your work, can you kind of give us a little bit of a rundown of how you got to this point in your career as a mental health professional?
Sure, yeah. So pretty much my story is my oldest son was really struggling as a teenager, and he had some amazing people in his life who actually helped him save his life. You know, they actually helped him get back on track. And it wasn't just one person. It was not some magical therapist. It was just they had something in common and they could actually speak to his experience. They were wonderful listeners, very empathic. And I just thought, maybe one day I can be one of those people. So I went back to school. I graduated, what was that? I guess it was now 5 years ago from Santa Clara University. And I started my my work towards my license, and I'm almost there. And I thank my son for giving me that direction, really. And the people who were in his life, these therapists and social workers, they were just wonderful people. And hopefully, I can be one of those folks for the kids that I get to see.
No, that's amazing. You mentioned the therapists were like just wonderful and amazing people that helped your son along his way. Can you share a bit more about what are some of the ways maybe that they created this impact with your son that caused you to like shift your entire life and decide to become a therapist?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, Rosalind. So I think what it was about them was that they weren't afraid to talk about things that we needed to talk about, right? They weren't afraid to talk about suicide. They weren't afraid to talk about drugs and alcohol. They weren't afraid to talk about sex and sexuality. And I was just astounded. It was like we considered ourselves, pretty open parents, be able to talk to our kids and so on, give them direction and stuff. But they were just, they were brave. They were just willing to go there, not just with him, but with us as a family. And I used to refer to the first place we went, in the therapist there, I used to call it the honesty room, because we had no idea, and we would just kind of go there, and each of us had kept some honesty that we wanted to share, but we'd save it up for that weekly meeting, right? And we had to learn how to do that in our own lives. So they were just really great at doing that, is listening and bringing up topics that needed to be brought up.
Yeah, I can definitely relate. I remember just thinking about my experiences with therapy and therapy in relation to going with someone else. And I definitely understand, like, you just understanding or feeling this place is safe enough for me, and I would carry everything from the whole week, and it was a place where I could just kind of unpack everything and share it and leave it there, which was good in certain circumstances, because then maybe you don't take the conflict with you into your life and you can be lighter in your life. So I can definitely relate with the safety that kind of therapy brings or gives you along in your journey. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
that's
absolutely.
amazing. You mentioned your family and uh, your relationship with your wife. So I'm just
Hmm.
curious if you could share what your love story has been like with your wife.
Oh wow! So, man, you want me to go all the way back? Because
All
I
the
was
way back.
all the way back. I was on my bike, riding on my way to the dorms, and she was walking to the gym, and I was like, oh my gosh, and it was just like one of those moments, like I don't want to say it was like the movies, but it was like, oh man, does she see me looking at her? And about a month later, I got to meet her in person, and she told me later on that she told her friend to push her into me so we could meet. So, and we've been together ever since. Just ups and downs, and jobs and no money, all this stuff. And so we got two kids, 29 and 22. We've been married. We just celebrated 32 years.
Wow.
Yeah, at the beginning of this month. So at the beginning of February. So
That's
it's been quite a
amazing.
journey.
Congratulations. And I definitely have to have both of you here on the show so we can like delve more into your love story and learn more about all the ups and downs and the triumphs that you've had, definitely to get to 32 years. That's unheard of these days. And I'm sure it's a really amazing love story.
Thank you.
Um, we're going to be talking about leadership in relationships. What does leadership in relationships mean to you? I guess let's start there.
Yeah, that is so interesting because I'm kind of a follower and I
Mhm,
wanted to be a leader. I just, I'm a bit of a follower. I'm kind of assess kind of what's going on and let me just kind of go along
mhm,
with what's happening. And then if something doesn't feel right, then I'll say something. But yeah, I think it's so funny. I think it means something different to me now. It means just kind of doing some things that nobody is maybe expected me to do. And I just kind of fill in the gaps. I'm kind of a team player, and I've learned to be that way. Because I played sports and I was a team captain and all that kind of stuff.
mhm,
And I just early on, I thought that I needed to be the team captain, right? And I had to realize, especially after we had our first child, that I was like, I was third string, and she was the team captain because she knew how to take care of him and all that stuff. So I just had to learn how to follow her lead. I didn't know anything about babies, and I didn't give birth to him. So it's just, okay, I need to defer to her. So I've learned to follow, where
mhm.
appropriate. And I learned how to be honest. And I think that's important, how to be honest and direct right up front about something that really matters instead of keeping it to myself. That I think is what leadership looks like to me in a relationship.
Yeah, no, that must be a lot. I can't imagine all that happened for you to get to that point. But maybe tease out a little bit. How was your idea of leadership distinct before, when you were a team captain, when you
Hmm.
played sports, versus a little? It sounds like leadership now is you giving your spouse the room to lead in the areas that she's an expert in, and then you
Right.
step in other areas that you're an expert in. But I
Right.
just am curious about the contrast between the two different times in your life.
Yeah, growing up, your question takes me back to my childhood. And my dad was a truck driver and a construction worker, right? He was a construction foreman and a truck driver. So he had a lot of autonomy. And my mom took on the leadership role when he wasn't a lot. I mean, she took on the leadership role when he was around, but he was kind of the Supreme Court, and she was sort of like, the, I don't know, I guess the kind of the municipal
Yeah.
court or something like that, right? She called the shots when he wasn't around. And then when he was around, she was sometimes still calling the shots, unless he was like, hey, So that's the kind of leadership I observed growing up. And it's so funny. I was writing in my journal today about how I was prepared to enter the world of sports, which was very male dominated, of course, and it's emotional and all this stuff and all this rigor and all that stuff. So that's learning from my dad about leadership, learning from my mom about leadership, and then learning how to follow directions and going into sports. I thought, okay, one of these days I can be a team captain and be the role model for my teammates, right? And so that's what I sort of took into my relationship with my wife when we were dating. But I kind of transitioned into being like the protector. Like I have a very strong protective instinct, and that got out of control, you know. And I have had to learn how to be a good listener, right? And not to try to take charge, just be a good listener, you know. And like I've heard people say, I'm sorry, my answer is kind of long here, but
No,
I've heard people say, ask themselves a question like in these relationship things, like, why am I talking? And I've learned to ask the question, why is she talking? Not like in a negative way, but like
yeah.
she's talking for a reason. So I have to sit and like, oh, okay, let me take this in. Is she feeling sad? Is she upset? Is she happy? Maybe she just wants to have fun, or I don't know. So I have to sit and discern and observe and interact and discern that. So yeah, that's what I've learned to do.
It sounds like you've learned to really listen to what your wife is truly saying, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to maybe what your thought of what she should be saying or how she should be feeling or how you should be protecting her
Mm-hmm.
versus what may be really happening in real life in real time. So I think that that's admirable. I'm sure that was fraught with challenges to get to the point where you're actually listening to what she's
Right.
actually saying,
Right.
versus
Right.
maybe your preconceived notions that you've learned from your family and your parents.
Mm-hmm.
So now, 32 years in, how would you like, what does it mean to love your wife at this point for you
Oh my
versus
gosh.
what it meant to love your wife when you guys were when you saw her on the bike and all those
Yeah.
many years ago?
Yeah. Wow. What does it mean to love her? Gosh, I think I'd have to ask her, honestly. I mean, I'd have to ask her, how she's receiving this love, but I think it just means like we've been fortunate that we've been able to grow up together, right? At 18, 19, 20 years old, right? We were just kids. I mean, we are just adolescents and, ups and downs and so on. I think we broke up once for like 2 days, right? It might have been 3 days. I can't remember. It's kind of a blur. But what it means, she's my person, right? And I'm hers, and we don't always agree, but we've learned how to just talk things out, even if we don't agree. And I think we've learned to be patient with each other, and that I'm not exactly sure how that happened. I think it started to happen just because we were just hanging in there. And but we have fun together. So gosh, what does it mean to love my wife? It just means that she's, I know it's corny, but she's my best friend, right? So because we've pretty much grown into adulthood together, all these years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I hear you so much. I feel like if you can't play with your partner, like then who are you like who do you play with? Because I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of like life or relationship is the mundane, it's the everyday, it's the picking the kids up, making dinner. And in those moments, you have to find joy. Not every moment is like a big, exciting
Right.
celebration. So I think finding joy, finding friendship in those moments is kind of
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
makes it really special.
Yeah.
But now that we've gotten a chance to get to know you a little bit, we're going to move to the next segment of the show, which is the relationship rundown, where we unravel some of today's love trends, and some topics. So we will start with the first topic, which is, um, about being in survival mode?
There's just as much fear of submitting to someone as being a leader. A part of us being in survival mode is that you can't show weakness. That's every animal. When every animal is in survival mode, you have to hide your weaknesses. It's about getting through the next moment. And what we've been through as Black people in this country, we still very much in survival mode. Yes. It's harder for you to think long term. So now I got to leave my survival, not my love, not my happiness, not my survival, up to this individual, or I got to lead another individual. And a lot of us haven't reached a place in our own relationship, like with self, to where we healed enough to realize, like, oh my God, like I'm capable of this. This person does trust me. It's not about survival anymore. We passed that. Like, we actually building something here. So I think we definitely, as Black people specifically, have to give ourselves grace. We have one of the most unhealthy relationships with leadership that you could point at.
Wow, there's like so much to unpack there, but I'll let you, especially since it was from a very male perspective, talk about kind of leadership of self versus leadership in relationship. Just what you got out of that kind of clip.
Yeah. I watched it a few times before and I thought, oh, okay, this is interesting that he's talking about being in survival mode, which I totally understand because, it's like I said, I have a really strong protective instinct and it's not just my survival, it's the survival of my family. And I have to check myself and be aware of what's going on around me, literally in my physical environment. But it is a very male oriented kind of approach, right? Or perspective, I guess, but I think, gosh, being a leader is, I honestly believe it's learning how to be a follower. And when I say that, kind of understanding the needs of people, my children, our children, what do we need to do next? What's most important? That kind of thing. And I think really demonstrating that kind of, affection. I come from a very affectionate family, right? And our family is very affectionate. It's not uncommon. Our younger son who still lives with us, he'll say, I love you, Dad, that kind of thing. Every day, so, and I think that my wife and I have been co-leaders. I think it's really important to understand the strengths that somebody has and actually go, okay, you're really good at that, and praise them for that. And then I have my part, which is to do some other stuff, right? So, and accept praise for that, So there's kind of a give and a take. I think we got, I want to say it's kind of like a double-headed leadership kind of thing going on for us at this stage, right? Mm-hmm. And it's taken some time to get there. A lot of time, I would say.
Yeah, I'm sure. I think that's the interesting thing about relationships that we don't hear about in like, it's going to take you time to grow into the kind of relationship. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there's something wrong if you're growing into the relationship that you have, or into the kind of person or the kind of leadership that you want for your family. And I think that what resonates with what you said is the idea that you are protective of your family, but you've learned to kind of understand what everyone needs, and kind of, the way I hear it is like kind of be the person that creates the environment, the safety in the environment, so that everyone else is getting what they need. And having been in relationships where I haven't felt safe, I can only imagine what that does for your family and for the way in which your family can show up today, because you're creating that kind of safe environment where there's the level of support, the level of respect that's necessary. But that is something that we don't, there's not a lot of psychosocial education. And given the context of us as Black people in America, we spend so much time being in survival. What are some ways in which we can kind of break out of survival and maybe into this more sense of leadership in relationship? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. Thank you so much. That's a great question. How can we get out of the survival mode and get into, being leaders, or, someone who is doing something that others, in my family would like to follow, right? And that's such a great question. And I would say my answer to that is, I don't think we can grow unless we reflect. Like I've come to believe that. Rosalind, I've been journaling for 30 years. Literally, I've been journaling for 30 years. And the first journal, I think I've always been kind of like, I wouldn't know myself. I can't know myself unless I reflect upon what's been going on in my life and trends and, what are my relationships and stuff like that. And so I think that's an important piece, because what I've realized over the years is that I've had to look at my family of origin, right, and recognize when they're showing up in my relationship with my wife. And I'm talking about people who are not with us anymore. Both of my parents are deceased, but the things that I've learned and how I learned to be in relationship, like, as a friend of mine says, that those are the people for him, his parents and his family, they taught him how to be a person. Right. And so if I don't pay attention to that, right, when I'm reacting to something or not reacting or frozen or whatever, sometimes it's my family of origin that's speaking, unless I, take the time to become aware of, oh, okay, this is really how I'm doing. And I can say, hey, yeah, that really makes me uncomfortable. Maybe we can talk about this later, or whatever it is, and be honest in that way and open. And I'm not saying I've been dishonest. I'm just saying being direct and open about what, vulnerable, really enough to say that really scares me. What's happening now is really scaring me, or whatever, and attuning to, what's going on with my family members. I'm very feeling, it's no surprise, I'm very kind of emotion oriented, right? And I try to pay attention to how my kids and my wife and other people are feeling about things, So I hope that
Yeah.
answers your question.
Yeah, no, totally. I think the way in which we lead ourselves shows up in how we can lead others or help co-lead a family. And a lot of how we are leading ourselves, we've learned from how we grew up in our families of origin. And without the ability to self-reflect, with the journaling, I journal too. I didn't journal growing up. Journaling is something relatively new for me, but I use this journal format called the gratitude journal because I actually don't like
Mm,
writing long sentences, but it gives you these very specific prompts that are so helpful to just reflecting on your day and the ability to stay focused on like everyday good things happen. And if you can
mm-hmm.
like attune yourself to the good things that happen, then it just kind of improves your how you feel generally about yourself, and
Mm-hmm.
also you can reflect on the things that may have not gone as well, and
Mm-hmm.
why they've not gone as well. So I really like that journaling
Yeah.
piece. And faith is a big part of my life, so there's a faith aspect of it for me in terms of prayer and just being able to, like as you've mentioned, listen to my feelings and understand what I'm feeling and where it's coming from, whether it's right now in this moment or if it's coming from a deeper place. So definitely answers the question and sparks a
Mm-hmm.
lot of like need for even further self-reflection so that I can be a better leader and show up as a better leader for myself in my own life. So yeah, very, very
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. Can I share something?
Yes,
Can I
please.
share
Yeah.
just a little bit more about that?
Of course. Yeah.
This was probably this might have been about 8 or 9, maybe 10 years ago. And I was in the kitchen. This is an example. I was in the kitchen and my younger son was doing his homework at the table, right? And I was making something in the kitchen and my wife was sitting there and she was doing something else, or maybe she was helping him with his homework or something like that. And I'm standing there and I start to have a response, and I don't even know why. Like all of a sudden my heart starts beating faster. I get some shortness of breath and I'm like, oh my gosh, what is going on here? Why am I feeling nervous? It's just homework and dinner happening, right? And I realized, and I'm like, it took me probably about 5 minutes to realize that I was having a response because I was expecting my son was struggling with his homework and I was expecting my wife to get on my case, right? To get on my case like I was supposed to do something. And I go, oh my God. Like I was in the present moment, you know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
kind of like my mom, my mom would just, she would, if something happened that she didn't like, she would, she would, she get mad about something at somebody who was just standing nearby. Right. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's really where that came from. And that's how I realized, oh my gosh, my childhood is showing up in my present relationship, right? In the moment, unannounced, right? And I was like, okay, I need to write my journal about that.
Yeah, it needs to unpack. The therapist needs to unpack as well. So
Yeah. Yeah.
totally here and can definitely relate. Have had many instances where like I get triggered by something and realize that it's, oh wow, this is my childhood showing up again for me.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
definitely relate. So the next video we have is about, I think, emotional unavailability.
You are emotionally unavailable, if somebody else that you're attaching to is emotionally unavailable, what will happen is when we block out emotions, life will keep testing you until you almost hit a catastrophe and your emotions have to catch up with you. And so that's how we're designed. That's how life is. That's how God works, So it might be that I don't show my emotions, don't show my emotions, don't show my emotions. And then eventually my husband says, I can't deal with you like this. I'm going to leave you. And I'm left with, if you are emotionally unavailable, or if
Wow.
Yeah, wow. I can so relate to this. So when my dad passed away, I didn't cry. I don't think I cried over my dad's death until maybe a year or two after he passed away. I took the bar exam. Like I just got in like go mode. I got to do this, and I didn't. After the bar exam, after I was done with it, I got really sick because I realized that I was holding myself up, and it's something I tend to do in difficult, challenging moments in my life. I hold myself up, and I hold that emotion. But like I said, I didn't start journaling till not too long ago, and journaling has become a way of me kind of releasing that in front of that those feelings as opposed to holding it in and not expressing the emotion. It did provide me not being available emotionally in that way did provide me with the ability to kind of like move through difficult moments in my life, but very not very effective because then
Yeah.
you're not operating from your full authentic self. So I definitely can relate with being emotionally unavailable, and I didn't really think of myself as such until I watched this video and I got this language for this and was reflecting on my life, and I was like, oh wow, this is me too.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely emotionally unavailable. I'm not sure how the video struck you or what you got from it.
Yeah, it's funny. Thank you for sharing what you shared, and because it's so funny. Like, not funny, haha, or anything, but
Yeah.
it's so interesting that our emotions play such an important part of who we are, and in relationship, that's what keeps people together is that emotional bond, right? Whatever it is, right? I think that's what draws us to our friends. That's what keeps us, calling our friends and texting them and hey, what's up? How you doing? That kind of stuff. And so, but emotional availability is so important because it's bi-directional, right? It can happen within us. And the video reminded me that it can happen within us, but it can also happen in relationship with somebody else, right? And kind of not just knowing that we're having emotions, but recognizing, okay, like, oh, this is what I'm feeling and feeling it in my body. And now what do I do with that? Right? Do I share it? Do I talk about it? Do I write in my journal? Do I try to ignore it? And we've all been in that mode where we got to keep going. We just got to keep going, and yeah, so I think it's that's emotional availability is that's something we probably need to talk more about. I really do think we need to talk more about that.
Yeah. Being emotionally unavailable in terms of, is this something that you've maybe had to help some of your kind of clients, your students, or other couples deal with, and maybe what are some of the ways in which you've kind of helped them deal with their emotional unavailability and help them become, I guess, more available in their relationships?
Yeah, yeah. It's taken me back. It's been a while since I've seen some couples because I'm now working with teenagers, teenage boys at my at the school where I work. But I will say this: I learned so much about relationships in those couple sessions because people would, for example, people would talk about what was going on with them, and we'd talk about how do you. I'd simply ask, how do you know when he's upset, or how do you know when she's upset? And I would just stick with one person, one partner in the pair, right? And keep asking them questions. And what do they see? What do you hear? And where does that register with you, and so on. And every time I did that, being an associate, being a new to all of this, people would share things with me, the therapist, in front of their partner about what was going on inside of them, right? And every time the partner said something like, I never knew that she was feeling that way or he was feeling that way when I left the room, right? I never knew that she was afraid that I might leave the house and go drive drunk or whatever it was, right? I never knew that she was, that she responded or reacted to that, that facial expression in that way, that sort of thing. And so it created this sort of bond. Right. When I had the privilege of working with these couples, some of them were high conflict couples and some of them were just struggling with a certain issue or something came up in their life, And when I would I was trained by my supervisor to stick with one person, right? And basically focus on them because that's modeling the same communication that's taking place that can take place between them when the therapist is not around, right? And so I'd start to ask, for example, I'll ask the spouse or one of the spouses, and I'd say, well, how do you know he or she is upset, right? And they'd say, oh, well, he raises his eyebrows, he breaks eye contact, et cetera, all the signs, right? And so, and after they describe all that, I say, what's when he does that or when he did that, what was going on with you? And oh my gosh, I guess my breath got shortness of breath, my mouth got dry, I was started to be afraid, et cetera. And then what happened and so on, right? And he'd leave the room. And then I'd ask the person, well, what did you do while that happened? And they start to describe that, right? How they were just torn down on the inside, turmoil, all this stuff, right? And every single time, the partner had no idea that he or she had that effect on the other partner. Never, they just didn't know. Like, how could we know what took place in the room that we just left when we were upset, And every time the other person made themselves available so they could come together. They said, oh my gosh, I didn't know you felt that way. And I go back to them and say, well, how do you want to respond? And so on. And it was beautiful. I reminded them they were doing the work. I'm just an observer. They saw me once an hour a week, they were doing the work and that was beautiful to watch. So, yeah.
Yeah. So like when we are emotionally available and we share what's happening for us inside, I think it's really eye-opening. I remember being in couples therapy situations and not being aware of what your partner's inner world is like. And that's because we're not open enough or vulnerable enough or emotionally available enough to share really the feelings behind the anger, the feelings behind the fear. And when we do that, like you say, we open up and it becomes a much more loving environment where each couple wants to be, each person in the relationship wants to be there and show up for their partner versus the facade of the anger that we tend, or whatever other emotion we tend to put up against our partner.
That's beautiful.
So yeah, that's very, very interesting. So the third video is about communication. I think commitment. Yeah, about fully committing in relationships. So
infidelity, the worst thing you can experience in a relationship.
I would say if you commit to marriage, it's a commitment to the other person. The other person is a human being. Me and her got together when we was kids. We plan on being with each other until we die. How many phases does one human being go through in that time period for me to get, nah, I'm done with this if something happened? That's me copping out to what I said I was going to do. Now, if it's flagrant against what you said, then it has to be addressed in a more aggressive manner. But I feel the commitment outweighs everything. So no, to me, losing her in this life is probably the worst thing, because it's nothing that can't be arranged or talked about, or space. You hear I'm there, then we come back together. But if she's gone from this life, I can't no longer work anything out.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Tell me. Yeah. And so is the question about commitment. And I think, I'm going to go back to what we were just talking about, and about emotional availability. And I think that this level of commitment that people can have, I think it's great if it shows up when there's nothing going on, right? when it's doing dishes or whatever it is, right? It could be anything. It could be, cleaning up dog poop. I don't care. But those are commitments too. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just those are just small examples of like what can happen, what's happening in the relationship, right? So I think, I think it can be hard for people to commit at that level, right? That micro level, right? And the macro level at the same time, right? I think that can be tough. I've experienced that, not that I haven't been committed, but like if I'm going through my day with my pouty face on, and expecting some, I don't know, sympathy or a hug or something, like maybe I need to just ask for a hug instead of putting on my pouty face. You know what I'm saying? And I have one. I'm not going to lie. I do have one. So I don't put it on that often anymore, but I still have one, So, yeah, but that commitment though, I think, and then if you can be committed in the small ways, then a person can be committed in the big ways. That's what I think. And that's what I hope for, my relationship and other people's relationships too,
Yeah, I definitely agree with him and with what you're saying, that commitment is definitely a practice. And if you can't commit to the day-to-day doing dishes, showing up at the time you say you're going to show up, then the larger things in relationships of fidelity, it becomes next to impossible to show up in those bigger ways. I do agree with most of what he was saying, that you should be committed. You have to be committed to your commitment to this person almost. I would say that for me, I think that you should have a standard for your relationship of what is not acceptable, not just a blind commitment of where, like, if these things are violated, oh, it's a serious conversation that we have to have.
Absolutely.
And things definitely have to change. Because I think that if it's just a blanket commitment, then it can leave or open the door for people not behaving in ways that nurture the relationship.
Right.
Almost like as if there's like no consequence, or it's like flagrant almost, like, as he mentioned. But it's tough, but I don't think I see myself being blanketly committed. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but I find it hard to be just committed in theory in that way, without any kind of standard or limitation around certain ways in which, not just for in both directions, right? There are certain ways I don't want to show up in my relationship with my partner that should be unacceptable to my partner, my showing up that way, and vice versa as well. Like, I feel like we need to hold ourselves to the standard of relationship that we want in our relationship, no matter what. So
Yeah. Can I say one more thing about? I totally agree. Like holding ourselves to our own standard, and then also saying, "Hey, that's not okay with me. Like that happened, but that's not okay with me." Everybody's got something that's not okay with them, right? In every relationship, right? Like you can't just talk to me that way, And that's when it gets real, right? So, and I like to, I think of that as, Rosalind, I think of that as the friend test, right? And every friend I have, even if it was not explicit or intended. Every friend I have has passed the friend test, right? When I was like, man, can I count on this person or not? You know, are they gonna, they gonna be sarcastic when I'm almost in tears? Can they handle me being sad or angry or whatever? And including my wife. My wife has passed the friend test, so many times I don't even have to think about it anymore. And I think I passed it too, So I hope so by now.
Yeah, 32 years in, better pass
Right.
better pass the friend test. So we have conversations that we need to have.
And that'll be another friend test.
Yes. And I think another thing he mentioned infidelity, particularly, and what I would say to that is like, I actually don't think it's something that can't be overcome, but I do think it requires honesty on the part of honesty on both people's part, because I think in relationship everything, it takes two to tango in every situation. And in as much as the person committing the infidelity maybe is not acceptable, is not what is desired, but I think it's important to be introspective and to say, did any part of my behavior create an environment where this could have happened? It's not your fault. I definitely don't think it's a fault of the person who it was done to, and the person committing the infidelity totally is responsible for their actions. But I think it's important to self-reflect, as we've been talking about, as to whether there was anything that caused a turning away for either partner. And this could be a male partner or a female partner. Is there anything I did that caused my partner to turn away from me in this way? But sometimes it has nothing to do with you. Absolutely. It's totally the other person's, like of the other person's doing, but the ability to be open and vulnerable enough to have the conversation, I think, is critical. And I've heard that people who are able to overcome infidelity get to a much better place in their relationship and are able to have a much better relationship at the end of the day. But I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing from more than one of the supervisors that I had. Clinical supervisors talked about how couples do, in fact, can overcome that. Right, it becomes part of their shared history, and they can actually work through that and have a better relationship. But it takes a lot, and there's walking through the valley of darkness and sadness and all of that stuff, and then they're able to make a choice about how they want to be together going forward, even if they don't stay together, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, so that's what I've heard. Now, I have not worked with couples on that, but I'm just new to this career, newish, so but I definitely heard that that's the case. But I think you're right, like understanding, like it's really important for people to understand why they themselves do what they do, and in relationship, like you said, their role in their partners and how the relationship develops or doesn't develop, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the fourth video, control versus care. Yes, this is an interesting one.
If someone else is trying to control you, it can often come in the form of care. It can look like care, but it's actually control. And there's only one way to know. Is someone giving you care in the way you want to better you, or are they doing it to make you more comfortable and convenient for them? If someone
There's like so much with this. This is definitely something I've experienced in relationship, where I was in a relationship with a partner and we were discussing like careers and job opportunities, and I had taken the bar, and this person was very afraid that I would get a job that would pay more than he is making right now. And as a result of those fears, and I really think it's not necessarily that he came from a bad place. He wanted to be a certain kind of provider. And in his mind, that kind of provider makes more money than the female in the relationship. And if I did this thing, he was worried about what does it mean about me as a person. versus, oh, you've taken the bar, you've passed the bar. You should get a career. You should have a new career that allows you to, like, prosper in that way, even if it means you making more money than me. So that was immediately what came to mind for me. So but I never was able to put it together in that way of care versus control. I didn't understand at the time. So this is actually a good kind of reflection point for me. But
Yeah.
what has your experience been with care versus control?
Yeah, I think I've experienced this more with my kids than with my wife, right? If I'm totally honest, because there's, in every young person's life, I think, well, I'll speak for my young people, there's a point where I want to do all kinds of things for them, right? And I have to be honest with myself and say, oh my gosh, I'm trying to control them, right? If dad shows up with these gifts and, whatever, right, then they're going to be more malleable. Like they'll be like, I can actually shape them if I show up with the right kind of gifts, right, or whatever, and just so I've been guilty of that. That's for sure, And I have this friend of mine. I was thinking about this earlier about how this friend of mine says, and actually a few of my friends have said to me that help is the sunny side of control, right? So it's like, what? It's like, oh, I just want to help, for my own benefit, right? So I can feel good. So now that's not always true, but I have to discern, like, dang, was I really trying to just control the situation there? Was I trying to get something, or was I really caring, right? Doing something without expecting anything back, So that's where it takes me.
Yeah, I think that is that. Like, if there is a slogan for this episode, that is it right there.
I didn't make it up. I got it from my friend. So,
hey, no, you can take all the credit in this. But it is so true. Even reflecting on myself, when have I, like, I'm sure there are times when I have shown up wanting to be helpful and not recognizing that I am actually trying to control or reach a certain outcome or show up in a certain way. And it's very important to be discerning, to be like, okay, let me do this with no expectation. Let me do this with no desire. But it's hard because we care about people. We want what we think is the best for them, even if they may not want it for themselves. And we try and create context in which we create the outcome that benefits us. So you can definitely understand. Yeah. So I think those are all the videos we have. I can't believe we've gone through them already, but we do have questions from the chat, from the group chat. Next segment here. So the first question, I'll toss it to you, is I've been with a guy for a few years, but he doesn't seem interested in me anymore. How do I know when my relationship is over?
Dang. I hate to say this, but it sounds like they already know that the relationship is over. I mean, if the other person, is not, they've been together for a few years and he doesn't really seem interested anymore. Wow, that sucks, first of all, but it sounds like the person has already made their own answer. Like they know the answer already.
Yeah. It's interesting how we kind of know the answer, but we just want the confirmation.
Right. Use the rubber stamp, right?
Yeah. But I would just add, layer on top of that, I would add, like, what's your level of communication like? Because in relationship, it's always a conversation, right? Are you communicating as frequently as you used to? How often does the person make a special effort, take you out on a special date? And if it's been a few years, I definitely feel you have the, you should be able to sit down with the person and speak honestly about how you're feeling distant. I would make it about your feelings and not maybe put it on them, so that they don't feel attacked in the conversation. So how you're feeling distant from them, and how you could point to objectively, like, the dates you've had. They've been farther and fewer in between, and maybe how that's not the level of dating, and see what their reaction is to that conversation, to see if maybe you're misreading the situation. Maybe they have stressors they haven't told you about. But more than likely, if you're feeling it's over, it's probably
Yeah.
over, unfortunately.
Yeah. And you make some great points. I mean, I didn't even think about honestly. I didn't even think about the hey, let's have a conversation, and somebody can talk about their own feelings, right? Like you can't like somebody can feel any way they want, and whether we like it or not, whether we agree or not, those are just their feelings, right? Like, hey, I just need to check this out with you. Is this I'm experiencing it this way? Is that how you're experiencing this? You know, and this happened, this didn't happen. Oh, like, can we talk about this? I think that's yeah, because then there can be some resolution, whatever the answer is. Maybe the person says, no, I've been distracted by work. Oh, okay, let's talk about that then. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's great. The next question. Hi, Rosalind. I had a traumatic childhood, and I find that trauma is keeping me from being my authentic self in my relationship. I'm in therapy, but sometimes I blow up on my partner when things trigger me. How can I save my relationship without giving up on my healing?
Mm,
Great question. I definitely don't think it's an either or. I don't think you have to give up on your relationship and in order to have your healing. I don't really subscribe to the idea that you have to go away and heal yourself and then come back. A lot of
right.
healing comes in relationship. So I definitely, first of all, I think you should talk to your therapist about it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a therapist. So I think you should talk to your therapist about, continue to talk to your therapist about and unpack your traumatic childhood, and try and maybe think through what is it about a particular situation that triggers you. And I would encourage you to share with your partner what your triggers are and
Mm-hmm.
game plan before the trigger happens. Okay, when I get triggered, I'm going to need to take a 10-minute timeout from whatever conversation, self-regulate myself before I can come back to this conversation. And given the fact that this is a sore spot, I don't think it happens. It may not happen the first time. You may
Mm-hmm.
get back in your trigger the next argument. You may get back in the trigger the next 3 or 4 arguments. But I think
Mm-hmm.
slowly over time, if you're committed to self-regulating in a healthier way, you will begin to make small changes and finally get to the point where you're probably both laughing about the trigger of like, oh my God, I'm triggered again. But now you're not as reactive about the
Right.
trigger. But it definitely is a process with triggers. But definitely continue going to therapy and and growing for yourself individually, and that growth would show up in your relationship. But I'm not sure. You're the therapist, so what do you think? What do you think?
Yeah, I love what you said. And I'm going to add something to, I'm going to agree even more. I'm going to double down on something you said, which is
Please do.
not just go to therapy, but also you said we heal in relationships, right? I mean, that's how we're made. We are wired for healing in relationships, right? And so when we're aware of what's going on with us, and then our partner is aware of what's going on with us, ideally they can respond in a way that's healing for us. Not that they have to be responsible for it, but that they can assist in helping us heal from that, whatever that is. And sometimes it's enormous, right? And sometimes it's just subtle, right? Like I don't know about anybody else, but I was raised in a household where parents gave the dirty look, and that was like the shaming dirty look. I find that triggering now. And I told my wife about that. I'm like, so I'm just saying, that there's like, oh, that's showing like I think our relationships from the past show up in the present when we least expect it. But being able to kind of talk about those things, then our partner can be helpful, right? Oh, you're crying. Oh, you're not crying because you're mad at me. You're crying because you're afraid. Oh my gosh. Then I can embrace you, or whatever it is.
Yeah,
Right.
you're absolutely right. I think one of the things for me that reminds me of is like raised voices. I cannot do raised voices from how I was raised. Like it takes me to a place where I can't like I can't self-regulate as easily with, so I need, even if my partner is upset, to speak in a tone that is very even keeled. I, like, you can tell me anything, but once you raise your voice, I definitely need a timeout because I shut down and I'm not able to respond. But as you mentioned, the right partner can be such a healing experience for you because you can kind of rebuild your relationship, in my case with raised voices, by understanding that I can have someone speak to me in a manner that is, allows me to hear them and hear maybe a negative thing they have to say, but I can receive it when your voice is not raised, because that just, it becomes very traumatic for me personally. But
Yeah.
100% agree with the right relationship can be such a healing space for you, and bring so much ease to your triggers. So yeah, big believer in that. So the last question we have in our group chat for this week is, I'm in love with someone much older. Is this normal? I've seen plenty of age gap relationships online, but I want to know if you think I'd be making a mistake by pursuing someone 10 years older than me.
I wish I had the answer for everybody, but I don't. I don't think so at all. I don't think so at all. It just depends on the two people involved, right? So, yeah, if somebody's older, I haven't had that kind of relationship, but being able to talk about these things, right? Like, oh my gosh, when I'm 70, you're going to be 80, right? Like, what's that going to be like, or whatever, right? Or when I'm 80, you're going to be 70, and being able to talk through those things. I mean, I think it's okay to do that, right? It just depends on the comfort level. But I also think that people know what they want. I really believe that people really know what they want, right? They really do. If they are honest with themselves, if they do a little soul searching and stuff, if they know themselves well, they know what they want, and they can share that with their partner, right? Like, this is what I'm hoping for, and I think there's everything right about that.
I totally agree. I think that there's nothing wrong with an age gap in a relationship. I think it does. The only caveat I would add is, like, depending on, like, I don't think it's a great idea if you're still developing as a young person. Like, even though you're 18 and you're old enough, I think between 18 and 25, the brain is still developing. So I would be cautious of an age gap at that age. But I think some people are more mature, and maturity isn't necessarily a number. And if you're mature enough, like you said, you understand who you are, you understand what you need, and someone with more experience is helpful to you, and you lean on maybe someone who has more youthful energy to bring to a relationship, hey, by all means, it's hard enough to find someone to love this person and they love you. Rock on. Enjoy yourself, for sure.
Yeah, sure.
But that's it for the group chat. And that's kind of all we have for you guys this week. That's all, folks. But I'm just curious, do you have anything you're working on right now that you want the folks out there to know? Where can we find you? Anything you want to share with our audience?
I'm not, the only thing I'm really working on is passing my licensing exam. And I think it's so important, and because every licensed therapist has had to undergo this process. This is a long vetting process, right? And it's done so that people can be safe, right? So that the clients can be safe and know that their therapist has been vetted. And I think that's so important, right? That's the real purpose of it, is keeping people safe, which is our job and our responsibility, and it's in our hearts to do that. So, so that from that side, that's what I'm focused on immediately. But I really want to work with. I've been doing that. I've been discerning that I'd like to work with some athletes, people who are involved in athletics. I say athletes, but anybody involved in athletics who has experienced childhood trauma. That's something, a year from now, I hope to be doing that, because I think it's so important. I look back at my time in sports, and especially in a game like football, that the I would say probably half the guys I personally know experienced some childhood trauma, whether that was being separated from a parent or a family member being incarcerated, or someone with substance abuse in their immediate family, or domestic violence or whatever. Like, I would say probably about half the guys I personally knew signed up to play football, and so I'd like to work in that direction. I'd like to work in that realm, hopefully within the next year or so. I hope y'all be hearing from me sometime in the next year.
First of all, that's amazing. As someone who is really keen on therapy, I know how hard it is to find an African American male therapist out there. So the world definitely needs you. Can't wait for you to be out there and be licensed and be working with people. And I think the connection with working with athletes is another very unique one and so needed. You have so many athletes who play at really high levels, who maybe they're coming from really dire circumstances, or a lot of like less financial means, and they now have such great financial means, and yet they don't know how to manage success, or and as much as they know how to play the game and play it at an elite level, they don't know how to manage the success. And I think those are ways in which you can definitely be helpful, given your background as an athlete as well. So I'm excited for you. I'm excited for what the world gets to see when you get to be out there as a licensed therapist. We can't wait.
Thank you.
Would love to have you back and learn more about that work that you do.
Thank you, Rosalind. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Welcome. Of course.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
All right. Till next time, folks. Thanks for tuning in to the No Ordinary Love podcast. I'm your host, Rosalind Ona, reminding you that extraordinary love is out there. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a 5-star review. Until next time, embrace your own unique love story.